It started as an ordinary day, one of those forgettable routines that you don't think twice about. Linda was bustling around the bedroom, packing for her girls' trip while I was finishing up some work emails in the other room. The hum of her energy floated through the house, the sound of zippers being tugged, hangers scraping across the closet rod. It was all so mundane, so painfully normal. I had no reason to suspect that anything was out of place. I passed by the bedroom doorway on my way to grab a drink from the kitchen when something caught my eye, a flash of something unfamiliar in her open suitcase. I slowed down, my curiosity piqued. At first, I thought it was just some random item of clothing, maybe a new jacket or a fancy dress she hadn't told me about, but when I leaned in for a closer look, my heart skipped a beat. Lying there in plain sight was a police officer costume. It wasn't just any costume, it was the full package. A shiny badge glinted in the light streaming through the window, and next to it a pair of silver handcuffs nestled snugly against the fabric. The hat, neatly folded, sat on top like a mocking exclamation point. My breath caught in my throat as a wave of confusion washed over me. My first thought was denial. No, this couldn't be what it looked like. Linda wasn't like that. She was my wife, my partner, the person I trusted most in the world. There had to be a reasonable explanation for why she was packing a costume like this for her trip. Maybe it was a joke, a prank for one of her friends. Maybe someone else had asked her to bring it along. But the more I stared at it, the more impossible it became to convince myself of these excuses. The questions started to pile up in my head, each one more damning than the last. Why hadn't she mentioned this to me? Why was it tucked away in her luggage as though it were some sort of secret? And most importantly, what was she planning to do with it? My stomach churned as I tried to piece together a puzzle I didn't even know existed. I didn't want to jump to conclusions, but it was like my brain was already running ahead of me, connecting dots I didn't want to see. A police costume wasn't just an odd thing to pack, it was loaded with implications. The badge, the handcuffs, these weren't innocent accessories. They were props for a role, something meant to be used in a very specific kind of scenario. My mind began to spiral, diving into the worst-case scenarios. Images of Linda, dressed in that outfit, laughing and flirting with someone who wasn't me, filled my head. It was an intrusive, unwelcome thought, but I couldn't shake it. The betrayal, if that's what this was, felt almost tangible. For a moment, I just stood there, frozen, my hand gripping the edge of the suitcase. I felt like I'd stumbled into a scene from someone else's life, like this couldn't possibly be happening to me. Linda and I weren't perfect, but we had a solid marriage, or so I thought. Sure, we had our arguments, our ups and downs, but nothing that ever made me think she'd betray me like this. As the initial shock wore off, it was quickly replaced by something hotter, more consuming anger. I could feel it bubbling up inside me, my chest tightening, my jaw clenching. How dare she? How could she stand there, packing for her trip like everything was fine while hiding something like this? The sheer audacity of it was almost unbelievable. And yet, I didn't say anything, not yet. I didn't barge into the room, demanding answers, even though every fiber of my being wanted to. Instead, I stepped back, retreating to the hallway, my heart pounding in my chest. I needed a moment to think, to process what I'd just seen. I tried to rationalize it, to find some way to make sense of it all, but the more I thought about it, the more it felt like my world was unraveling. The person I had trusted implicitly, the woman I had built my life with, was now at the center of a storm I didn't know how to weather. As I stood there hidden from her view, I couldn't help but wonder how long this had been going on. Was this the first time, or had there been others? Had I missed the signs, ignored the red flags? The doubt crept in like a poison, infecting every happy memory, every moment of trust we had shared. It felt like the ground beneath me was shifting, like the foundation of everything I knew was cracking apart. And the worst part? I couldn't do anything about it. Not yet. Not without more proof. Not without hearing her side of the story. But deep down, I already knew the truth. The discovery of that costume changed everything. It wasn't just an item in a suitcase, it was a symbol of something much darker, something I wasn't ready to face. And yet, I couldn't ignore it. The image of it was burned into my mind, a constant reminder of the betrayal I could no longer pretend didn't exist. I couldn't stay calm. The image of the costume in her suitcase haunted me, replaying over and over in my mind like a relentless loop. I had tried to step away from it, tried to collect my thoughts, but the fury building inside me wouldn't let me think clearly. My hands trembled, my chest tightened, and my jaw ached from how hard I was clenching my teeth. Every step I took around the house only seemed to make the situation worse in my mind. It was as if the walls themselves were closing in, mocking me with every second that passed. Linda was still in the bedroom, humming to herself while she packed, completely oblivious to the storm brewing just a few feet away. How could she be so calm? How could she act so nonchalant while carrying out such a blatant betrayal? I paced the hallway, my mind racing with questions that had no answers. Was she doing this to hurt me? Had she always been this way and I'd just been too blind to see it? Or worse, was she simply indifferent to how I would feel? That thought stung the most, that I might not even matter enough to her for my reaction to be a concern. Part of me wanted to confront her immediately, to march into the room, grab the costume, and demand an explanation. But another part of me held back. What if I was wrong? What if there was some innocent reason for it all? The thought seemed ludicrous, but I clung to it like a lifeline. I didn't want to believe that my wife, the woman I had trusted with my heart, could be capable of something like this. Yet the evidence was staring me in the face. The handcuffs, the badge, the hat. It was all too deliberate, too planned. This wasn't an oversight or a coincidence. This was a choice she had made, a decision to pack those things, knowing full well what they represented. And she had done it right in front of me, as if daring me to notice. The anger in me grew, a fire that burned hotter with every passing second. My thoughts spiraled, imagining the worst. Who was the other person? Did I know them? Had they been in my house, sat at my table, looked me in the eye while hiding this secret? The betrayal felt even deeper when I thought about the possibility that it wasn't just her. It was them. Whoever they were, conspiring against me, laughing behind my back. I found myself standing outside the bedroom door, my hand hovering near the handle. My breath was shallow, my pulse racing. I wanted to barge in, to force the truth out of her, but something stopped me. Maybe it was fear, or maybe it was the weight of realizing that once I opened that door and asked the question, there was no going back. Whatever she said, whatever truth she revealed, would change everything. I leaned against the wall, trying to steady myself. My thoughts were a whirlwind, and I couldn't seem to grab hold of any one idea long enough to make sense of it. I thought about the good times we had shared, the moments when I had looked at her and felt like the luckiest man in the world. How could those memories exist in the same world as this moment? How could someone who had seemed so genuine, so loving, do something so cruel? It wasn't just the betrayal itself that hurt, it was the disrespect. The way she had packed those things so openly, as if my feelings didn't even cross her mind. It made me feel small, insignificant. Like I was just some obstacle she had to navigate around on her way to whatever she was planning. I wasn't her husband in that moment. I was just there, in her way, unimportant and disposable. The idea of confronting her became a war within myself. Part of me was ready to explode, to let all of my anger and frustration pour out in one unfiltered outburst. But another part of me, quieter but no less insistent, whispered that I needed to be careful. If I let my emotions take control, if I confronted her in a blind rage, I might end up pushing her further away. Or worse, giving her the satisfaction of knowing how much she had hurt me. I felt trapped. Stuck between my need for answers and my fear of what those answers might be. My thoughts began to drift to darker places, wondering how long this had been going on. Was this the first time, or was I only now discovering something that had been happening for months, maybe even years? The uncertainty was like a knife, twisting deeper with every unanswered question. Eventually, I stepped away from the door, retreating to the living room. I needed space, a chance to breathe, to think. But no matter where I went, I couldn't escape the weight of what I had seen. The costume was like a specter, haunting me, refusing to let me rest. I felt like a volcano, ready to erupt, but with nowhere for the lava to go. I sat down on the couch, my head in my hands, trying to make sense of everything, but no matter how hard I tried, the truth was unavoidable. Something was wrong, something big. And no matter how much I wanted to pretend otherwise, I couldn't ignore it anymore. The life I thought I knew, the marriage I thought I had, was slipping through my fingers, and there was nothing I could do to stop it. As the day dragged on, the storm inside me only grew. I had thought that stepping away, giving myself time to process, might help me calm down, but it didn't. If anything, the quiet moments just gave my thoughts more room to fester. I couldn't stop replaying the moment I saw the costume in her suitcase. Couldn't shake the sinking feeling that the woman I had trusted implicitly was hiding far more than I could comprehend. I tried to distract myself, picking up my phone, scrolling mindlessly, pretending I wasn't sitting there with 1,000 questions, screaming for answers. But nothing worked. Every sound from the bedroom felt amplified, every movement a reminder of her casual betrayal. I couldn't ignore the audacity of it all. She wasn't even trying to hide what she was doing. Not really. The suitcase was left open, the items plainly visible. It was almost as if she didn't care whether I found out. When Linda finally walked out of the bedroom, she was carrying something else, and the sight of it nearly made my blood boil all over again. In her hands was an extra-large rubber item, pulled casually from the cupboard as though it were nothing. She wasn't hiding it. She wasn't even pretending to be subtle. The nerve of it was staggering. It was in that moment that everything seemed to crystallize for me. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This wasn't an innocent mistake or a joke gone wrong. It was deliberate. She was packing these things with a purpose, and that purpose had nothing to do with me. The realization hit like a punch to the gut, and for a moment, I couldn't breathe. She moved with a sense of purpose, placing the item in her bag with the same detached calm she had shown all day. It was infuriating, maddening, but also revealing. This wasn't someone racked with guilt or second thoughts. This was someone who had already made up her mind, someone who had decided that my feelings didn't matter. I felt a surge of anger rise in me, hotter and more consuming than anything I'd felt before. How dare she? How could she stand there, going about her plan so blatantly, as if I didn't exist, as if the life we had built together meant nothing? It was like she was mocking me, daring me to react, to say something. But I didn't, not yet. As much as I wanted to explode, to let the full weight of my fury and hurt crash down on her, I held back. I watched her instead, studying her movements, her expressions, searching for something, anything, that might make sense of what she was doing. But there was nothing. No hesitation, no guilt, no second thoughts. Just a quiet confidence that made my stomach turn. My thoughts spiraled as I tried to process what this meant for us, for our marriage. Was this who she had always been? Had I been blind to the signs, too trusting to see what was right in front of me? Or had something changed along the way, something I hadn't noticed until it was too late? The questions came in an endless stream, each one more painful than the last. And yet, through it all, I couldn't bring myself to confront her. Not yet. I didn't know if it was fear or pride or some twisted hope that there might still be an explanation waiting to be uncovered. But deep down, I think I already knew the truth. Whatever we had, whatever we were, was gone. And the woman standing before me wasn't the person I thought I knew. I couldn't stop imagining what would happen next. Was she going to walk out that door without a second thought? Was she going to meet someone else? Someone who had no respect for me, for the life we had built together? The thought made me sick to my stomach, but I couldn't push it away. It was there, constant and unrelenting, like a weight I couldn't escape. Even as she finished packing, even as the minutes ticked by and the reality of what was happening set in, I stayed rooted in place, unable to move, unable to speak. I felt powerless, trapped in a situation I had no control over, watching as everything I thought I knew crumbled before my eyes. When she finally zipped up her bag and stood there ready to leave, the finality of it hit me like a ton of bricks. This wasn't just a fight or a misunderstanding. This was the end of something. And as much as I wanted to stop her, to make her see what she was doing, I knew it was already too late. She had made her choice, and now I had to decide how I was going to respond. The breaking point wasn't a single moment, but a slow, excruciating realization that the life I thought I had was gone. And as she turned away, as she moved closer to the door, I felt a shift within myself, a spark of defiance, of resolve. If this was how it was going to end, I wasn't going to go down quietly. The moment Linda reached for her suitcase, a sense of finality settled over me. It was as though time itself had slowed down, every movement deliberate and heavy with meaning. My eyes followed her as she adjusted the handle, her expression calm and resolute. She wasn't hesitating. She wasn't second-guessing her decision. This was a woman who had made up her mind, and it left me seething in silence. I had been holding back, trying to process everything in my head, trying to make sense of the chaos. But now, with her standing at the threshold of our home, suitcase in hand, the reality of the situation was too stark to ignore. This wasn't just some fantasy or a fleeting temptation. This was her walking out, her turning her back on everything we had built together. And it wasn't just about leaving for a trip. It was about what that trip represented, the betrayal, the lies, the utter disregard for me and our marriage. As I stood there watching her, my anger boiled over into something sharper, something more visceral. I felt my fists clench at my sides, the muscles in my arms tight with tension. My mind raced with everything I wanted to say, every accusation, every demand for an explanation. But no words came. The silence was deafening, broken only by the faint sound of her shoes clicking against the floor as she made her way toward the door. It was infuriating how composed she was. There was no guilt in her expression, no trace of hesitation. She moved with the confidence of someone who believed she was in the right, someone who had already justified her actions in her mind. It made me feel small, insignificant, like my feelings didn't matter at all. And maybe, to her, they didn't. The thought stung, cutting deeper than I wanted to admit. I had always believed that no matter what challenges we faced, there was a baseline of respect between us, a foundation of mutual care. But this was something else entirely. This was cold, calculated indifference. It wasn't just the betrayal itself that hurt. It was the way she carried it out, as if I were nothing more than an obstacle in her path. My gaze shifted to the suitcase, to the items tucked away inside. The police officer costume, the handcuffs, the oversized rubber, all of it was a mockery of the life we had shared. Those weren't just props for some fun weekend. They were symbols of something darker, something that had been festering beneath the surface of our marriage for who knows how long. And now, with her standing there ready to leave, it all felt unbearably real. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest, a mixture of rage and heartbreak swirling together into something I could barely contain. She wasn't just leaving for a few days. She was leaving me behind, discarding me like an afterthought. And the worst part was the look in her eyes, a mixture of defiance and apathy that made it clear she didn't care how much it hurt. She paused for a moment, glancing at her phone, her lips curling into a small, almost imperceptible smile. It didn't take much to guess what or who she was thinking about. My stomach churned at the thought, a sickening wave of nausea washing over me. Somewhere out there, someone else was waiting for her. Someone who had no regard for the life they were helping to destroy, and she was walking toward them without a second thought, leaving behind the man who had stood by her, trusted her, loved her. I wanted to scream, to lash out, to demand answers, but all I could do was stand there, frozen in place, the weight of it all pressing down on me. Every moment felt like an eternity, each second stretching out into unbearable silence. My mind raced with everything I wanted to say, but the words wouldn't come. And then, as if sensing my inner turmoil, she turned to me. Her expression was unreadable, a mixture of annoyance and detachment. She didn't offer an explanation, didn't try to justify herself. She didn't need to. Her actions spoke louder than any words ever could. She had made her choice, and nothing I said or did would change that. For a brief moment, I saw a flicker of something in her eyes, maybe regret, maybe doubt. But it was gone as quickly as it came, replaced by the same cold determination she had shown all day. She reached for the door handle, her movements deliberate and unhurried. As she opened the door, a rush of cold air swept into the house, carrying with it the finality of her decision. I could see a car parked at the curb, its engine idling, its headlights cutting through the growing darkness. My heart sank as I realized that her lover, the person she had chosen over me, was waiting just outside, ready to take her away. In that moment, something inside me snapped. The anger, the pain, the humiliation, it all boiled over into a single, burning resolve. If this was how she wanted to end things, then fine. But I wasn't going to let her walk away without consequences. She thought she could leave without looking back, but she was wrong. As the door clicked shut behind her, I felt a strange sense of clarity. This wasn't just about her betrayal anymore. It was about reclaiming my dignity, about refusing to be a victim in the story she was writing. Whatever happened next, I knew one thing for certain: I wasn't going to let her have the last word. The moment the door closed behind her, a deafening silence filled the house. It was the kind of silence that wasn't peaceful or calming. It was suffocating, pressing down on me with the weight of everything that had just happened. I stood there for a moment, staring at the door, as if expecting her to turn back, to reconsider, to show some sign that she cared about what she was leaving behind. But she didn't. The car outside revved its engine, and then it was gone. My heart pounded in my chest, a chaotic rhythm of anger, pain, and disbelief. She was really gone. After everything we had shared, after all the years we had spent together, she had walked out so effortlessly, so casually, as if none of it mattered. The betrayal wasn't just about her actions, it was the way she carried them out, with no regard for how deeply she was cutting me. I sank onto the couch, my head in my hands, trying to process the whirlwind of emotions coursing through me. The anger was still there, burning hot and unrelenting, but underneath it was a profound sadness that I couldn't ignore. This was the woman I had loved, the woman I had built a life with, and now she was gone, choosing someone else over me without a second thought. I replayed the events of the day in my mind, every moment etched into my memory with painful clarity. The costume in the suitcase, the oversized rubber pulled from the cupboard, her dismissive attitude, it all came rushing back like a flood, overwhelming me. I couldn't understand how we had gotten here, how the woman I thought I knew so well could turn into a stranger right before my eyes. But as the minutes ticked by, something shifted inside me. The sadness began to give way to something else, a cold, determined resolve. I wasn't going to sit here and wallow in self-pity. I wasn't going to let her betrayal define me or consume me. She thought she could walk away without consequences, but she was wrong. I got up from the couch, my mind racing with thoughts of what to do next. If she thought she could humiliate me, make a fool out of me, she was mistaken. I wasn't going to let her get away with it. This wasn't about revenge, not entirely. It was about reclaiming my dignity, about standing up for myself in the face of her betrayal. I started by going through the things she had left behind. There were reminders of her everywhere. Clothes in the closet, shoes by the door, photos on the walls. Each one felt like a slap in the face, a cruel reminder of the life we had shared and the lies she had told. But instead of letting them hurt me, I used them as fuel. With every item I packed away, with every memory I boxed up, I felt a little stronger, a little more in control. Next, I turned my attention to the practicalities. I wasn't going to make this easy for her. If she thought she could walk out of my life and still enjoy the comforts of the life we had built together, she was sorely mistaken. I called the bank, the utility companies, anyone I could think of to start untangling our shared responsibilities. I wasn't going to let her use me as a safety net while she ran off with someone else. As the hours passed, I found myself feeling strangely empowered. For the first time in what felt like forever, I was taking control of my own life, reclaiming the parts of myself that she had trampled on. It wasn't easy. Every action was accompanied by a fresh wave of pain, a reminder of what I had lost. But with each step, I felt a little closer to freedom, a little further from the grip she had on me. By the time the sun began to set, the house looked different. It felt different. The photos were gone, the reminders of her packed away, leaving behind a space that felt empty, but also mine. It was a bittersweet feeling, a mix of loss and liberation. I sat down at the kitchen table, exhausted but resolute. This wasn't how I had envisioned my life turning out. I had never imagined that the woman I loved would betray me so deeply, or that I would have to rebuild my life from the ground up. But as painful as it was, I knew it was also an opportunity, a chance to start fresh, to create a life that was mine alone. In the days that followed, I kept moving forward. It wasn't easy. There were moments when the weight of it all felt unbearable, when the memories threatened to pull me under, but I refused to let them. I reminded myself of what I had learned, of the strength I had discovered in the face of her betrayal. I didn't know what the future held, and I didn't pretend to have all the answers. But one thing was certain, I wasn't going to let her actions define me. She had made her choice, and now I was making mine. I was choosing to move on, to let go of the anger and the pain, and to build a life that was stronger, freer, and more authentic than anything we had shared. As I looked around the house, now stripped of the remnants of our life together, I felt a strange sense of peace. It wasn't the ending I had wanted, but it was an ending nonetheless, and with every ending comes a new beginning.